The Russian Mi-24, or as NATO refers to it, the Hind, is perhaps the most iconic symbol of the Soviet Union's air power, and was one of the most feared helicopters of its time. When it was first introduced in 1972, there was nothing else quite like it. A formidable gunship, the Hind could serve as both troop transport and attack helicopter. It packed heavy firepower and was heavily armoured, but for its immense weight, it was surprisingly fast. The Hind wasn't just impressive on paper either, it had a combat-proven record through extensive deployment in conflicts like the Soviet-Afghan War, where its effectiveness earned it the nickname Satan's Chariot among Mujahideen rebels. Even today, the Hind is still in use in over 50 countries. For years, the United States looked on the Hind with a mix of fear and interest. Specifically, interest in getting their hands on one and learning what made the machine so great, and what its limitations were. This would be a very difficult thing to achieve, however, as the US and the Soviet Union were embroiled in the Cold War. If you don't know much about the Cold War, well, the war part meant that Russia was not going to freely share their military secrets with the US, and the cold part meant that the US could not just attack a Soviet airbase and capture some Hinds, because then the Cold War would be a hot war, and nobody wanted that. So how could the US learn of the Hind's capabilities without also involuntarily learning of the Soviets' nuclear capabilities? They'd have to be sneaky. By 1987, they had recovered at least one Hind from a Soviet conflict, but nothing airworthy. The opportunity to acquire a fully operational Hind would only emerge during that year's Toyota War. Yes, the Toyota War is named after that Toyota, due to the prevalence of Toyota pickup trucks being used as improvised fighting vehicles on the battlefield. The Toyota War was fought on the border between Chad and Libya, and was the final phase of a broader war between the two countries. Libya did not recognize the legitimacy of the government of Chad, which had been plagued by civil war since its independence from France in 1960, and laid claim to territory in northern Chad because that part of the border had been agreed upon back in 1935, not by Libya and Chad, but their colonial rulers, Italy and France. France supported its former colony Chad in the conflict, as did the US, whereas the anti-Western Libya was backed by the Soviet Union, and so the conflict became a proxy war, a stage where the US and Soviet Union could indirectly compete for power and influence without erupting into open war themselves. Although outnumbered, Chadian forces made good use of French and American supplied support, particularly the aforementioned Toyotas, and they soundly defeated the Libyans, who were expelled from Chad, leaving behind millions of dollars worth of military equipment, much of it supplied by the Soviet Union. This did not go unnoticed by France and the US, who were not simply content that their side had won. They were desperate to get a hold of those machines, especially seeing as the coveted Hind helicopter was apparently among them. France and the US agreed that they would help each other recover the abandoned hardware and share the spoils of their loot. They then asked Chad if they wouldn't mind letting them in to clean up all that pesky rubbish littering the desert. After receiving payment in the form of $2 million and a batch of Stinger missiles, Chad happily gave permission, and so began Operation Mount Hope 3. For the US, the focus of the operation was securing at least one operational Hind helicopter. They didn't want to cut it up or try to disassemble it for transport, they wanted one wholly intact. This would be challenging, but the task was further complicated by the fact it had to be carried out in total secrecy. Although the Libyans had been defeated, they still had some forces scattered around the area, and the US feared that if anyone learned of the plan to recover the abandoned military equipment, the Soviet Union would put pressure on the Libyans to ensure that there would be nothing left to recover. So, speed and secrecy were of the essence here, but how do you make off with an entire helicopter without anyone noticing? In June 1988, a single Lockheed C-5 Galaxy flew directly from Kentucky to Chad, carrying 2 disassembled Chinook helicopters and over 60 personnel. After landing, ground crew worked throughout the night reassembling the Chinooks and modifying them for the task ahead, stripping out components to save weight and making room for extra fuel. When they were ready, they took off at midnight on a 500-mile journey to the abandoned airfield where the precious hind was supposedly waiting. What they found was pretty much exactly what they had been hoping for: a Soviet-made Libyan Hind D in near perfect condition. Unfortunately, there was bullet damage on one of its engines. Nothing that couldn't be fixed, but it made the prospect of flying the Hind D out of the desert too risky. Instead, they prepared it for transport, wrapping it in tethers slung underneath one of the Chinooks, while the other Chinook, well, that one was just a backup in case the first one fell apart or something. The Chinooks left the area with the Hind just as a sandstorm crept in. The Hind was loaded onto the C-5 and flown back to America. They had just pulled off one of the greatest heists in military history without firing a shot. Between them, the French and Americans had managed to recover a number of surface-to-air missile systems, as well as radar, but the Hind was the true prize. The Americans repaired it to flying status and studied it thoroughly. It was then used in demonstrations and training exercises, which helped the US develop effective countermeasures it could later rely on in combat encounters in Iraq and Iraq. In 2012, the Hind was given to the Southern Museum of Flight in Alabama, where you can find it on display to this very day. I would say that's probably worth having a gander at. Not only does that Hind in particular have an interesting story, but more generally, the Hind is just a significant part of modern military history. It's been one of the most widely used and battle-proven helicopters since its introduction. Think of any war from the last 40 years, and there's a good chance that war is listed under the operational history segment of the Hind's Wikipedia page. Read further, and you'll find there's also a decent chance the Hind was used by both sides in that war. This is literally still happening today, so it's pretty funny to see pictures of this prolific war machine being scooped up and carried away like a little baby. If you'd like to see other bizarre and interesting things, why not check out some of my other videos? I have a lot of them in this style, so if this is the kind of thing you like, then you're in luck. I have a whole back catalogue you can binge on. And if you'd like to see more in the future, then subscribe. You can also join the channel membership to support me monetarily, and until next time, stay safe. This would be challenging, but the task was further complicated by the fact it would... And the US feared that if anyone learned of their plan to discover... And the US feared that if anyone learned of their plan to...